Let's suppose that you talk around 5 years to save $80,000 in retirement accounts. The natural assumption is that reaching $1 million from where you are now will take roughly 12 and a half times longer than that, because $1 million is 12 and a half times $80,000. By that logic, you'd be looking at 60 years of saving ahead of you, which would put a 45-year-old at $1 million around age 105. That's the mental math most middle-class workers run when they look at the gap between what they have and what they think they need. It's also completely wrong. The actual time from $80,000 to $1 million at the same contribution rate that built the first $80,000 is closer to 20 years, not 60, 3 times faster than the naive multiplier suggests. The reason the math behaves that way is the single most important thing nobody quite explains correctly about wealth building, and it's why crossing the $80,000 threshold matters so much. Once your existing balance starts generating real annual growth on its own, you stop being the only person doing the saving. The portfolio joins you. From that point forward, the math compounds in a way that flat multiplication completely fails to capture. This video walks through exactly how that works, what the timeline looks like at different contribution levels, and where the realistic path goes for someone in their 40s or 50s who has built that first $80,000 but isn't sure what to do next. I'm Tom. This channel is about real personal finance, the kind that actually works for normal people, instead of the kind that gets you to click on a thumbnail. No motivational fluff, no fantasy returns, no get rich quick. Just what the math actually does over time. If that's what you want, hit subscribe. The reason I'm using $80,000 as the starting point for this video is that it's roughly where most middle-class American households sit at midlife. Per Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances data and subsequent analyses, the median 45 to 54-year-old in the United States has somewhere between $87,000 and $115,000 in retirement accounts, depending on the data source. So $80,000 isn't an arbitrary number. It's roughly the median position for the typical viewer of this channel right now. The question is, what it takes to get from there to 7 figures. And the answer is, less than people think, but more time than they want. Why the naive multiplier is wrong. The reason multiplying the years it took to build the first $80,000 by 12 and a half gives such a wildly wrong answer is that compound growth isn't linear, it's exponential. In the early years of saving, when your balance is small, almost all of the growth comes from your contributions. You put in $1,000 a month, and the balance grows by roughly $1,000 a month, plus a small amount of interest. The contributions are doing all the work. That ratio shifts dramatically as the balance grows. By the time you're sitting at $80,000 invested at a 7% real return, the annual growth from compounding alone is roughly $5,600 in the first year. That's almost $470 a month of growth that happens without you doing anything. Once the balance crosses $200,000, the annual growth is $14,000, or about $1,167 a month. By the time the balance hits $500,000, the annual growth is $35,000, or about $2,900 a month. The portfolio is now contributing more to itself than most middle-class earners can save out of their take-home pay in any given year. This is what Charlie Munger meant when he said the first $100,000 is the hardest. The math is structurally different on the two sides of that threshold. On the way to $80,000, the saver is doing nearly all the work. After $80,000, the portfolio is increasingly doing the work, and that share gets bigger every year. So when the naive multiplier says 60 years to go from $80,000 to $1 million, It's silently assuming the next $920,000 comes from contributions alone, at the same rate as the first $80,000. The actual math says compound interest contributes the majority of that next $920,000, and the saver's contributions just top it up. The remaining journey takes a third of the time, not all of it. The passive scenario. Doing nothing else, just letting it sit. Let me make the extreme version of this concrete. Imagine someone with exactly $80,000 in a broad market index fund at age 45, who makes no further contributions for the rest of their life. No additional dollars get added to the account, no 401k maxing, no checking of statements. They just leave the $80,000 alone in a low-cost S&P 500 index fund and let it sit. At a 7% real return, which is roughly what US equity markets have averaged over the past century after adjusting for inflation, that $80,000 compounds to $1 million in about 37 years. So someone who starts with $80,000 at age 45 and does literally nothing else ends up a millionaire by age 82 in inflation-adjusted dollars. That's not a useful timeline for someone who wants to enjoy the money in retirement, but it shows what the existing balance contributes on its own when nobody is adding to it. Everything you do on top of the $80,000 with continued contributions is bonus, accelerating an already running clock. Most personal finance content frames the contributions as the entire engine. That framing dramatically understates how much the existing principle is already doing on its own. The active scenario. Modest contributions cut the timeline dramatically. Layer in $500 a month of contributions on top of the $80,000 starting balance, which is what someone earning $60,000 to $70,000 could plausibly save through their 401k. At a 7% real return, the portfolio reaches $1 million in 28 years instead of 37. So someone starting at age 45 hits $1 million by 73 instead of 82. That's still not great if the goal is retirement at 65, but it cuts almost a decade off the passive timeline. Step up the contribution to $1,000 a month, which is achievable for someone earning $80,000 to $100,000 with disciplined saving habits. At that rate, the same $80,000 starting balance reaches $1 million in 23 years. Now the 45-year-old hits the milestone at 68, which is essentially their retirement timeline. The math is now working at the pace of their actual life. Step up again to $1,500 a month, which is roughly what someone earning $100,000 to $120,000 can save if they're filling their 401k and a Roth IRA on top, and the timeline drops to 20 years. The 45-year-old becomes a millionaire by 65, right on schedule for traditional retirement. This is the scenario closest to the hook. If your first $80,000 came from saving roughly $1,500 a month for 5 years, continuing that same rate gets you to $1 million in another 20 years. Total time from $0, 25 years, not 60. For a higher earning household saving $2,000 a month, the timeline drops to 18 years. The 45-year-old becomes a millionaire by 63. So the gap between someone saving $500 a month and someone saving $2,000 a month, starting from the same $80,000 balance at 45, is roughly 10 years of timeline. Both reach $1 million. The high saver gets there faster, but the moderate saver still gets there well within a normal lifespan. What the sensitivity analysis actually shows. If you stack these scenarios up, a specific pattern emerges that's not obvious at first glance. The variable that matters most for this transition is time, not contribution amount. The 37-year passive scenario reaches $1 million from $80,000 with 0 contributions. The 18-year active scenario reaches the same target with $24,000 a year of contributions. The difference is 19 years and roughly $432,000 of total contributions, in exchange for cutting the timeline from 37 years to 18 years. Looked at another way, the contributions matter, but the starting balance and the return rate matter more than people typically realize. The $80,000 starting balance, even with no contributions, becomes about $310,000 in 20 years at 7% real return. So 31% of the way to $1 million happens passively, just from the existing balance compounding. The contributions are bridging the remaining 69% of the gap, but they're working alongside the compounding of the original principal the entire time. The two effects multiply, not add. The return rate sensitivity is also worth understanding. At a more conservative 5% real return, $80,000 plus $1,000 a month for 23 years grows to about $743,000, not $1 million. The same scenario at 9% real return reaches $1,415,000. The spread between those two assumptions over the same 23-year period is roughly $670,000. That's a much bigger spread than the difference between a 10% savings rate and a 20% savings rate over the same period. The return assumption is the single most consequential input in the entire calculation, and it's also the one nobody can control or predict. Plan around a middle range estimate and adjust your contribution rate to give yourself margin in case the next 2 decades underperform the historical average. Let me make this concrete with someone I know. Margaret is a 45-year-old office manager at a small medical practice in Ohio, divorced for 6 years with 2 kids in college. Her income is about $68,000 a year. Her 401k and a small Roth IRA together hold about $80,000, the result of 15 years of modest but consistent saving since she got her first administrative role at 30. She's been able to contribute about $400 a month consistently, even through her divorce and through helping with her kids' college expenses, because the contribution comes out of her paycheck before she sees the money. When Margaret looked at her retirement plan a year ago, she felt behind. The financial planning article she was reading said she should have 3 to 6 times her income saved by 45, which would be $200,000 to $400,000, not $80,000. She felt like she'd missed her chance to build real wealth. The math actually said something very different. At her current trajectory, with $80,000 invested and $400 a month of continuing contributions at a 7% real return, Margaret's portfolio reaches about $507,000 by age 65. Her expected Social Security benefit at full retirement age is roughly $1,800 a month, or about $21,600 a year, based on her earnings history. Social Security plus a 4% withdrawal on the portfolio gives her about $42,000 a year of inflation-adjusted income, against an expected retirement spending need of around $50,000 a year, based on her current lifestyle, minus the work-related expenses that disappear in retirement. There's still a small gap in that scenario. Not a crisis, but a gap worth addressing. The interesting math is what happens when Margaret's contributions step up after her kids launch from college, which is 2 to 3 years away. If she sustains $1,000 a month from then through age 65, her portfolio reaches about $728,000 instead of $507,000. The Social Security stream remains the same. The withdrawal from the larger portfolio at 4% is roughly $29,000 a year instead of $20,000. Combined with Social Security, that's about $51,000 a year of retirement income, which closes the gap to her expected spending exactly. Pushing further to $1,500 a month, which is feasible for someone earning $68,000 with no kids in college and no mortgage to worry about, brings her portfolio to roughly $913,000 by 65. Combined with Social Security, That's about $58,000 a year of retirement income, comfortably above her expected need. The cushion gives her flexibility for unexpected expenses, healthcare surprises, or the option to retire a year or two early if she wants. Margaret is one major savings rate decision away from being comfortably set up for retirement. That's a different conversation than "you missed your chance." The reason Margaret's story matters is that her starting position is roughly typical for middle-class American midlife. The median position for 45 to 54-year-olds in retirement savings is in the $80,000 to $115,000 range. So whatever the math looks like for Margaret, it looks like that for a meaningful share of viewers of this channel. The path from this starting position to a comfortable retirement is not extraordinary. It's just consistent. What stops most people from making the journey? If the math is this manageable, the next obvious question is why so few people actually complete the journey from $80,000 to a comfortable retirement balance. The answer is mostly behavioral, not mathematical, and it lives in three specific places. The first place it breaks down is the 401k contribution stops or shrinks during a tough year. A job loss, a medical event, a divorce, a child needing financial help. The contribution pauses for what's supposed to be a temporary period, and then it doesn't resume. Because the household has rebuilt the lifestyle around the higher take-home pay, the temporary pause becomes permanent. Multiple analyses of retirement participation patterns show that contribution interruptions are common across working lives, and once paused, contributions often don't resume at the previous rate. The pause is the silent wealth destroyer. The second place is the temptation to optimize at the wrong stage. Households at the $80,000 portfolio level often spend disproportionate energy researching individual stocks, alternative investments, real estate side projects, or active trading strategies. A 50 basis point improvement in expected return on $80,000 is $400 a year. The same energy spent on increasing contributions by $200 a month is $2,400 a year, 6 times the impact. But the contribution increase doesn't feel like personal finance. It feels like accounting. The optimization games feel exciting. The accounting wins almost every time. The third place is the early withdrawal. Someone with $80,000 in a retirement account looks at that balance during a difficult year and thinks, "I have $80,000 that could solve my immediate problem." They take the early withdrawal, pay the 10% penalty plus their marginal tax rate, and end up with $50,000 to $55,000 of net cash, which they spend on the immediate need. The cost isn't just the $25,000 of taxes and penalties. At a 7% real return over 20 years, the $80,000 that gets withdrawn would have grown to about $310,000 if left untouched. That's $230,000 of foregone growth on top of the $25,000 of immediate cost. Most households who take early withdrawals don't realize what they're trading until much later. How to actually run this play. If you're starting from somewhere around $80,000 invested and want to hit a meaningful retirement number, the path is built from 4 specific moves. The first move is to set up automatic monthly contributions at a fixed dollar amount that hits your account on payday. If you can't decide between $500 and $1,500 a month, start at whatever feels possible and increase it on a schedule, like an extra $100 a month every January for the next 5 years. The automation is the entire mechanism. Without it, the contributions become a monthly decision, and monthly decisions almost always lose to whatever else needs attention. The second move is to capture every dollar of employer match. For someone earning $80,000 with a typical 50% match up to 6% of pay, the match is worth $2,400 a year of free money. Most plans require you to contribute at least 6% of your salary to get the full match. If you're contributing 4%, you're leaving $800 a year on the table, every year. And over 20 years at 7% real return, that's about $33,000 of foregone wealth. The third move is to use the right accounts in the right order. The order of operations for most middle-income households runs roughly: capture the full employer match first, then eliminate any debt above 10% interest, then build an emergency cushion of 3 to 6 months of expenses, then fill the Roth IRA at $7,500 for 2026 or $8,600 if you're 50 or over. Once those four are done, marginal dollars go to additional 401k contributions up to the annual limit of $24,500 or $32,500 if you're over 50. The reason the order matters is that each step compounds the next. Skipping any one of them costs you more than the convenience of skipping it is worth. The fourth move is to leave the portfolio alone. Don't reshuffle based on the financial news. Don't try to time market entries and exits. The mechanical S&P 500 index fund, held continuously through the dips and the spikes, has historically outperformed almost every active strategy that's ever been measured. Per the S&P SPIVA scorecard, over the 15-year period ending December 2024, not a single U.S. equity fund category had a majority of active managers beat the index. The discipline of doing less is the discipline that pays. Why the journey is actually easier than it looks. Going back to the hook. The naive math says that going from $80,000 to $1 million should take 12.5 times as long as it took to build the first $80,000. The actual math says it takes 1/3 of that, because the portfolio has joined the saver as a second contributor to the project. Crossing the $80,000 threshold is the moment when that second contributor showed up. From $80,000 forward, the portfolio is doing more of the work than you are, and that ratio gets more favorable every year. Margaret will reach a number that supports her actual retirement needs, whether she contributes $400 a month or $1,500 a month. The contribution rate changes the absolute final balance, but it doesn't change whether she'll be okay. She'll be okay either way, because the compounding from $80,000 of existing principal is doing the heavy lifting in the background, year after year, regardless of what she's actively doing on top of it. The contribution rate determines whether she has a comfortable retirement or a comfortable retirement with cushion. Both are vastly better than where she felt herself a year ago, reading articles telling her she was behind. That's the version of personal finance the YouTube ecosystem mostly doesn't show. The version where someone who's been quietly doing the right things for 15 years has already won the most important battle, and the rest is just letting the math finish what it started. Drop a comment with where you currently are in the journey, whether that's $20,000 or $200,000 invested, and what timeline you're working with. I read every comment, and I'll reply to as many as I can. And if you want me to walk through the specific portfolio allocation framework I'd use for someone in their 40s or 50s trying to hit $1 million by retirement, the actual mix of stocks, bonds, and tax-advantaged accounts, hit subscribe, because that's the next video. I'll see you in the next one.